This is Dominic of the Dominomi Cold. Apologies, I'm getting over a cold, and so my voice may sound a bit weird. So, this is a follow-up video to my top Ancestry Feats core edition, and this time I'll be going over ancestries from player core 2 listed on screen now. I recommend you watch my previous video to understand how I've gone about making this list, as this video chapter follows the same rules, though for a quick refresher, I'll only be choosing common feats, and I'll only be picking one for each ancestry plus a runner-up. And I'll also be ignoring stuff that gives you any sort of proficiencies like skills, lore, weapon, etc., as basically all ancestries get their own version of that. And as with the last video chapter, these feat choices are my personal recommendations, and thus they aren't factually the best ones you should pick, aka this is all my opinion. If you happen to enjoy this video or find it helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing, etc. You know the drill. But let's crack this one open. Ignite the soundtrack. I can't really pull that one off, can I? Going alphabetically again, so we'll start with Catfolk, and I've chosen Catnap. Catnap allows you once an hour to spend 10 minutes having a little snooze, and it gives you temporary HP equal to your level that lasts for an hour. Now, this might sound kind of rubbish as it's not a lot of HP, but what do I always say in PF2E? Combine abilities. This ancestry feat effectively works very similarly to toughness in that you gain HP equal to your level, except you can combine this with toughness to effectively double your gain from that feat. But will you actually have time to nap once every hour? Well, it's only 10 minutes, and unless you're actively healing people with treat wounds or something, I don't see an issue with you having a quick shut-eye while everyone else is messing around, being noisy and stuff, and interrupting your precious nap. Seriously, who do they think they are? Apparently I can pull off role-playing a cat pretty seamlessly. And always remember that temporary HP isn't necessarily only for use in combat. You could technically use it like when a trap or haunt triggers or something. Those little bits of HP add up and ultimately may end up saving your bacon at some point. Just bear in mind that for barbarians this isn't particularly useful because rage gives you temporary HP anyway. As for runner-up, this one was another one of those toss-ups between two abilities. If you have terrible reflex saving throws, you should grab Cat's Luck, as it allows you to re-roll it once per day and take the better result. Otherwise, so long as you're proficient in acrobatics, you should probably take Catfolk Dance, as it's an ability that allows you to lower an enemy's reflex save with an acrobatics check. And on a crit success, they're also off guard to you as well, because who wouldn't want to watch a kitty do a little dance? Seriously, I'm asking you a question. And that's Catfolk. On to Hobgoblin, or Hobgoblin for those of you who are still sane. And the feat I've chosen is Cantorian Reinforcement. This is another one of those abilities that bumps up your degree of success when you roll a success. In this particular case, it works against diseases or poisons. Interestingly enough, I don't actually know of all that many diseases or poisons that do all that much if you roll a normal success on your saving throw anyway. So that might make this feat seem kind of pointless, but I think the reality is that if you fail in your initial save, especially if you get a critical failure, then having this ability when you get a normal success will immediately remove your affliction. Thus, this ability exists really to help you get over an existing affliction rather than resisting it outright initially. This feat also doubles up on abilities like the battle-hardened fighter class feature. If you have both, critical failures on said saves are treated as failures instead, which is a lovely little bonus. As I said in my previous video, these sorts of abilities that bump up your degree of success are actually not all that common until around level 7-ish, so grabbing this at level 1 is pretty significant, and you're definitely going to be coming across diseases and poisons with some regularity in PF2E. And at lower levels in particular, with how little HP you can have, they can be increasingly debilitating and deadly. So this feat is actually rather powerful. As for the runner-up feat, I've chosen Remorseless Lash. Now, the only reason I didn't pick this as the main feat for Hobgoblin is that some characters might not be all that interested in frightening enemies or keeping them frightened, etc. So I felt like the other one was a bit more universal, but otherwise this one is actually incredibly powerful, and if you're any sort of melee martial that likes to demoralize, not taking this feat would be pretty stupid. On to the next ancestry, Kholo, or Gnolls as they used to be called pre-remaster. And I've gone with Pack Hunter, which works exactly the same as the halfling runner-up feat I chose in my previous video. You gain a permanent +2 circumstance bonus checks to aid, and your allies gain that when they are aiding you also. I actually think this is a pretty phenomenal feat to take because of how essential it can be to aid each other with out-of-combat checks for skills, etc. Like, even having someone to do an aid check with treat wounds and the like is just very useful to have. And getting a permanent +2 circumstance bonus to that check is pretty awesome. And the +2 to aid checks in combat as well is pretty amazing. Bear in mind, a +2 is very strong in Pathfinder. It'll quickly lead to critical successes as the check for aid is a static 15. So Pack Hunter is a very practical feat to take at such a low level. There's going to be dozens and dozens of occasions where that +2 is going to end up turning a success into a critical success. As for the runner-up feats for Kholo, I've chosen Ask the Bones. Honestly, I partially chose this because the roleplay roguelike flavor of just having an old bone that you can ask questions and get a +1 circumstance bonus to your recall knowledge check once a day is just utterly hilarious to me, and that in itself makes it worthy of being a runner-up. Otherwise, I'd probably go with Crunch, because getting a D8 unarmed attack with grapple is very strong at level 1. Okie dokie, onto the lovely and batshit crazy Kobolds, everyone's favorite lizard thing. And I've picked Cringe because this ability is just so not cringe, actually, unlike my attempts at humor. I think I'm funny, at least. So Cringe is a reaction that triggers when an enemy critically succeeds on a strike against you, and you get to reduce the damage of the strike equal to your level +2, and that's after it's been doubled. So realistically, that's not going to reduce the damage by a significant amount, but again, it might be enough to keep you on your feet. And I think clutch abilities like this are the sorts that you realize you have in the most opportune times, and they really, really save your ass. The downside is that you can't use it again for 24 hours against the same attacker, but you can use it against other attackers. And that kind of means that so long as different creatures are critting against you, there's effectively no cooldown. Though if you're getting crit regularly by multiple different creatures, I'd probably reconsider your tactics in combat, or get some better armor, invest in armor proficiency, etc., because you must kind of suck, or your GM is very, very mean, or you've upset your GM, hence why they're so mean. What I'm trying to say is it's your fault because I'm victim blaming. On top of that, it is, of course, just another hilarious ability that perfectly makes sense for kobolds to get. The small, pitiful lizard creatures wincing just as they're about to get hit would be enough to stop the most hardened of barbarians from obliterating such a pathetic being. That's how I imagine it would work if someone was critting against me in real life anyway. I'm on a roll with this self-deprecating humor thing. As for my runner-up feat, I've gone with Scamper, as it's effectively a +5 status bonus to your speed as long as you are touching an enemy when you decide to move. And the bonus to AC for reactions is also pretty neat. And moving on to one of my favorite ancestries once again that I barely ever get to play for whatever reason, Lizardfolk. I've gone with Lightning Tongue. For one action, you can interact with something within 10 feet. And the descriptive text reads that it's faster than the eye can see. So this can be used, as far as I'm aware anyway, to actually do these interaction checks without anyone noticing. I'd probably argue as the GM that if they're directly looking at you and suddenly an object appears in your mouth or outside of your mouth, then it's probably not gonna work, but otherwise it should work, and you shouldn't need to do any checks for it to work. I think this is one of those feats that when you look at it and just think, yeah, that's kind of silly or useless or whatever, I'm not gonna get any use out of it, but there are gonna be situations where it actually can be used. Being able to pick up items in combat, for example, could be very useful. Say if you're using a throwing weapon and it lands 10 feet away from you. And if you're restrained or immobilized, you might be able to make the argument that you can use your tongue to grab certain stuff and use it. Again, this is down to what your GM allows. You could also use it for roleplay opportunities like stealing things, for example, when no one's looking, or even like grabbing an apple off a vendor's cart, etc. There's plenty of fun roleplay stuff you could do with this one. As for runner-up, I've chosen Parthenogenic Hatchling, which is a bit of a shame because it's kind of similar to the Cantorian reinforcement for Hobgoblins, though it doesn't work for poisons just as easy, and you can only pick it at level 1. It does come with that little dehydration and starvation benefit though. Next up is the adorable Ratfolk, or Yisoki. Seriously, who doesn't love rats? So I've gone with Rat Speak. This feat allows you to use the diplomacy skill to speak with rodents. Now, I tend to ignore these sorts of ancestry feats as I don't find them to be all that useful. Lizardfolk can take one for speaking with lizards, for example. But the reason I picked this one is because this list includes beavers, mice, porcupines, rats, and squirrels, and I feel like you're almost always going to be able to find a rat or mouse, or maybe even a squirrel knocking around somewhere in most biomes. And that puts it leagues ahead of some of the others, on par with the druid's ability to speak with animals or plants. Again, this is down to GM discretion, but I think that if you took this feat, it will be pretty hard to argue that you're not going to find one of those animals I listed somewhere. And quite frankly, getting to chat with a little rat sounds pretty awesome to me anyway, but I might be biased a little bit though, because I love rats. As for runner-up, I've picked Pack Rat. This feat isn't going to be all that useful later on in the game as you gain access to spacious pouches, etc., but early on, this is actually potentially very useful to help you carry back some loot from a dungeon and sell it. It's effectively a sort of economical feat of sorts, and should you end up with a vehicle of some sort for your campaign, there's nothing wrong with having an extra 50% additional storage space to put things in. You never know when these sorts of storage issues could occur. And if that doesn't interest you, there's also the Rat Familiar feat if you don't have a familiar already. On deck is Tengu, the bird ancestry, and I've gone with Scavenger's Search for my ancestry feat. This is a passive ability that gives you a +2 circumstance bonus to locate things like hazards and secret doors with the Seek action. And bear in mind that using the exploration activity Search in itself uses the Seek action. So this does indeed mean that you effectively gain a +2 circumstance bonus to locating hazards, hidden objects, secret doors, etc. permanently. And as we all know, in Pathfinder, every +1 matters, so getting a permanent +2 passive ability is kind of insane. This actual ability to me is even possibly a little bit overpowered, especially when it comes to traps and stuff. Genuinely a no-brainer to take this one over the others, in my opinion. Just bear in mind that you do kind of need to be actively searching when you're outside of combat for this to actually work. If you don't tell your GM you are searching, then you aren't. So you're going to want someone else to scout and do other exploration activities from then on. As for runner-up, this is another one of those toss-up situations. If your campaign is heavy on diplomacy, I'd probably pick Squawk. And if your campaign doesn't have that whatsoever, I think one Toad Hop is probably your better bet there. And I'd say the edge probably goes to Squawk for me personally, just because the roleplay flavor is fun. And I don't think there's anything wrong with randomly squawking in the middle of a sentence. I do it on first dates, and I have plenty of first dates, so obviously that... No way, it's bad if you have lots of first dates, isn't it? Anyway, moving on from depressing topics, last ancestry, Tripkee, the froggy frogs, not the toady toads. And crap sticks. They literally have 5 feats to choose from, and all of them are kind of meh. Especially with my self-imposed rules for this video chapter, which literally narrows it down to like 3. In that case, I'll probably go with Jungle Strider, which allows you to ignore difficult terrain in forests and jungles. And there's no limitation on the types of difficult terrain that you can entirely ignore. And on top of that, when you use an acrobatics check to balance on something made of plant material, you aren't off guard, and a success is a critical success instead. Not an incredibly amazing feat, but as I said, there aren't too many interesting ones for the Tripkee, unfortunately. Am I glad that this is the last ancestry, because if this was the first one, this would be a pretty weak start to the video. As for runner-up, I'm going to go with Nocturnal Tripkee, because it gives you dark vision, and dark vision is always a nice thing to have. And that is the end of my list of the best ancestry feats for the player core 2 ancestries. Hopefully this showcased a couple of the cooler feats that you could pick up for these ancestries, and if you have to make these choices, should potentially make things a little simpler for you. If you think there are different feats that I should have chosen, as always, feel free to comment and let me know, and feel free to tell me about some of the cool character builds that you've done using these ancestries. I always love to get some cool build ideas. As ever, thank you very much for watching, and if you found this video chapter useful and or enjoyable, please give it a like, comment, etc. and consider subscribing. But for now, this is Dominic of the Dominomicon, wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.